We have some incredible breaking news for you.
Giant's Causeway on the coast of Northern Ireland is one of the UK's outstanding natural features.
We have some footage that has been taken on a mobile phone.
For 3 weeks, nobody at the site had said the word out loud. Not once. They had files full of numbers, hours of sonar readouts, and a stone door that opened on its own schedule like something breathing in its sleep, but nobody had said the word. Then, on a Thursday morning in late October, with the tide pulled back low and the sky the color of wet slate, Dr. Maura Kinsella finally set it into a voice recorder for the record. We're going in. That single sentence is the reason this story exists at all, and it's the reason 6 people who thought they understood the natural world walked out a hole in a cliff face 3 hours later and refused to speak to each other for the rest of the day. To understand what came out of that door, you have to understand what led 6 trained scientists to break every safety protocol they had and climb into a space that, by every law of geology they knew, should not have existed. It started, as these things usually do, with a coincidence nobody thought twice about. A local fisherman named Owen Brady had been running lobster pots along a stretch of coastline near the causeway for 11 years. He knew every inlet, every collapsed shelf of rock, every place the water pooled strangely at low tide. In September, he noticed something he never seen before, at exactly the same 2-hour window each day. A section of cliff face that had always been flush and solid showed the faintest hairline seam, a shadow no wider than a fingernail, running vertically along a slab roughly the size of a shipping container door. He mentioned it to his brother-in-law, who happened to work maintenance for the Ulster Coastal Research Institute, a small applied geology outfit that monitored erosion patterns along the Antrim coast. That offhand mention is the thread that unravels the rest of the story. The Institute sent a 2-person team to check it out, expecting nothing more than an unusual erosion pattern worth a footnote in a quarterly report. What they found instead was a slab of basalt, roughly 18 tons by their estimate, moving. Not falling, not crumbling. Moving with the slow, deliberate motion of a door on a hinge, swinging outward roughly 14 inches before halting and reversing, always at the same 2 points in the tidal cycle. Dr. Tomas Whalen, the geologist who led that first visit, described it later as the single most unsettling thing I have seen in 22 years of fieldwork, not because it was frightening to look at, but because it was frightening to understand. Basalt doesn't hinge. It doesn't flex. Once it cools from lava into columnar rock, it behaves exactly like glass, brittle, rigid, and entirely without give. A slab that size moving on a fixed axis without a single visible crack forming at the pivot point was, in his words, a mechanical impossibility being performed by a material that has no mechanism. Dr. Kinsella was brought in within the week. She specialized in subsurface cavity mapping, work she'd done extensively on collapsed lava tube systems in Iceland and the Canary Islands, and she arrived with the calm skepticism of someone who had debunked a dozen impossible caves before breakfast. She set up ground-penetrating radar at a respectful distance, expecting to find a known lava tube that erosion had simply exposed, a mundane explanation for what looked, on the surface, like something extraordinary. The scan took 4 minutes to render. When the image resolved, she sat completely still for almost a full minute, according to her field assistant, before she quietly asked him to rerun the calibration, certain the machine had made an error. It hadn't. Behind the moving slab was a chamber roughly 9 meters deep, carved with a smoothness that natural erosion simply does not produce. No jagged edges, no random collapse patterns, just walls that curve with the same uncanny geometric precision as the hexagonal columns above them, as if whatever shaped the chamber had used the same rules the volcano had used to build the causeway itself 60 million years earlier. What made the discovery genuinely dangerous, rather than merely strange, was the timing problem. Every reading placed the chamber's formation at the same geological moment as the basalt columns surrounding it, meaning if the chamber was carved, it was carved while the rock was still cooling, tens of millions of years before anything with hands existed to carve it. Dr. Whalen ran the isotopic dating 3 separate times, using 3 separate samples because he assumed, reasonably, that a contaminated sample or a lab error was distorting the numbers. All 3 came back consistent. The chamber wasn't hollowed out later. It was there from the beginning, a negative space deliberately preserved inside rock that had once been 2,000-degree liquid fire. For 6 weeks, the team did nothing but observe from outside. They mapped the tidal correlation of the door's movement, which turned out not to be tidal at all. The timing shifted gradually across the weeks in a pattern that eventually matched something far stranger than ocean cycles, a slow, decreasing interval, as if whatever mechanism controlled the door was operating faster with each passing day, the way a clock winds down, except in reverse, winding up. Vibration sensors picked up a low, rhythmic pulse from inside the rock, steady and unhurried at first, then measurably quickening over the observation period. Thermal cameras, brought in mostly as a formality, showed something that made the formality suddenly feel insufficient. The interior of that unopened chamber sat at a stable 98 degrees Fahrenheit in solid stone, in the dead of an Irish autumn, with no explainable heat source anywhere near it. Every instrument they pointed at that cliff told them the same impossible thing from a different angle. Something in there was alive, active, and counting down toward something. That was the 6 weeks of external investigation the public would eventually hear about in fragments, in leaked lab notes, and one furious anonymous post on a geology forum that got taken down within a day. What the public didn't know, what almost nobody outside the immediate team knew, was that on the second to last week, the Institute's director quietly informed the team that a decision had been made above his authority to seal the entire access road under the pretense of a rockslide hazard and to formally recommend the site be handed to a government geological survey unit for further containment assessment. Dr. Kinsella understood exactly what that meant. Once the handoff happened, the team that had spent 6 weeks building an intimate, careful understanding of the phenomenon would be locked out entirely, replaced by people who would see none of the nuance, none of the pattern, and who would very likely misinterpret or deliberately obscure everything the original team had documented. She had 11 days before the handoff took effect. She decided, without asking permission from anyone above her, that the team would go inside. The morning they entered, the weather cooperated in a way that felt almost deliberate. Flat, calm water, no wind, a low gray sky that muted every color along the coastline into the same shade of ash. 6 people made the climb down to the ledge below the slab. Dr. Kinsella, Dr. Whalen, thermal specialist Dr. Aoife Ryan, structural engineer Declan Foy, a documentary videographer named Neil Casey, who had been embedded with the team for 2 weeks by that point, and Owen Brady, the fisherman who had first noticed the seam and who Kinsella insisted be present, since without his sharp eye none of this would exist in the first place. They arrived 40 minutes before the predicted opening window, set their equipment, and waited in a silence nobody tried to fill with conversation. The door opened exactly on schedule, the massive slab swinging outward with the same unhurried, oiled hinge smoothness it always had, revealing the same wall of total darkness the radar had mapped for weeks. But this time, instead of watching from a monitor, 6 human beings were standing directly in front of it, and the darkness did not stay dark. As the slab reached its full outward arc, a faint, low amber light bloomed somewhere deep inside the chamber, the way embers glow when you blow gently across dying coals. Casey's camera caught it clearly. The footage shows the light pulsing twice, in the same rhythm the vibration sensors had recorded for weeks, before steadying into a dim, constant glow. Kinsella went first because she said afterward that if something in there was going to end her career or her life, she wasn't going to ask anyone else to find out first. The chamber's interior matched the radar scans almost perfectly, the same curved, deliberate geometry, the same 2 smooth walls, except for one detail no scan had been able to capture. The walls weren't bare rock. They were lined floor to ceiling in a material none of them could immediately identify. A dull, fibrous, faintly reflective substance that Whalen initially mistook for a mineral deposit until he touched it and felt it give slightly under his glove, like touching the surface of a scar. Ryan's thermal camera showed the entire lining radiating that same steady 98 degrees, uniform across every surface, as though the whole chamber were a single living skin wrapped around empty air. At the back of the chamber, they found what the earlier scans had picked up as the 7, now 6, standing shapes. Seeing them on a radar screen as vague upright silhouettes was one thing. Standing 3 meters away from them in person was another experience entirely, and Foy, the structural engineer, later admitted it was the only moment in the entire expedition he seriously considered turning around and climbing back out. The 6 shapes stood in an uneven cluster near a shallow depression in the chamber floor, no longer in the neat rows the earliest scans had shown weeks before, confirmation that the slow migration the team had tracked from a distance was real, and had continued right up until the moment they walked in. Up close, the shapes resolve into something far less abstract and far stranger than figures. Each one had a rigid, elongated central form, roughly the height of A. Tall adult, encased in the same fibrous material lining the walls, as though the chamber itself had grown them rather than housed them. Where a face might be expected, there was instead a smooth, faintly ridged surface, unbroken except for a single narrow seam running vertically down the center, closed. It was Ryan who noticed the seventh space, the shallow depression at the center of the cluster, empty, its edges worn smooth in a way that suggested something had occupied it for a very long time and had, recently, left. Around that depression, and only around that depression, the fibrous lining on the floor had darkened to a deep, ashy black, as if something had burned there slowly over a period of days rather than an instant. There was no smoke smell, no soot, nothing to suggest fire, only that unmistakable blackened outline, roughly the size and shape of the 6 standing forms nearby, lying flat instead of upright, as though whatever had been there had finally, after 60 million years, lain down. The team spent 11 minutes inside the chamber, a number they know precisely because Casey's camera time-stamped every second of it, and because 11 minutes turned out to be exactly as long as any of them could stand to stay. It was Brady, the fisherman, who first noticed the seam on the nearest standing shape had shifted, fractionally, from closed to the barest hairline of open, the same hairline crack he'd first spotted on the outer cliff face 2 months earlier. He said the word out once, quietly, and nobody argued with him. They climbed out of the chamber with less than 90 seconds to spare, according to their own tidal predictions, and the slab swung shut behind them with the same silent precision it always had. No sound, no seam, nothing to suggest 6 people, and a camera crew had just walked out of solid rock. What came out with them was not, as some early rumor suggested, one of the standing shapes itself. Nothing followed them out of that chamber, in any literal sense. What came out was the footage, the readings, and a single sealed sample Ryan had taken of the fibrous wall material before anyone had time to debate whether that was wise, a sample that, when finally analyzed 3 weeks later in a properly equipped lab far from the coast, returned results that no one on the team has been willing to discuss on the record since. What the lab found, according to 2 internal sources who spoke only on condition of anonymity, was that the material was neither mineral nor synthetic nor, strictly speaking, biological in any category modern science recognizes, but that under a microscope, at a cellular scale, it showed structures disturbingly similar to healing tissue, the kind of layered scarring the body produces around a wound that has been closing, slowly, for a very long time. Whatever inference you want to draw from a 60-million-year-old wound that is only now finishing the process of healing is, at this point, entirely your own to make. The Institute has not released an official statement beyond confirming that an unusual geological formation was documented and that further study is ongoing under appropriate scientific protocols, language so carefully bloodless that Dr. Whalen reportedly laughed out loud the first time he read it. The access road remains closed under the original rockslide notice. The government survey unit that was meant to take over the site never did, for reasons the team was never given. 6 people who walked into that chamber together have, by all accounts, stopped speaking to each other regularly, not out of any falling out, but because, as Kinsella put in the one interview she gave, off the record, to a journalist who never published it, there isn't a way to have a normal conversation with someone after you've both stood in front of something like that. You just look at each other and you both know, and there's nothing left to say that the look didn't already say better. Owen Brady still runs his lobster pots along that stretch of coast. He says he doesn't watch the cliff face the way he used to, not because he's lost interest, but because some part of him has decided he'd rather not know if the seam widens again before someone official decides to tell the world. The footage Casey shot inside the chamber has never been publicly released in full, only a handful of stills, heavily disputed, heavily debated, endlessly re-uploaded and reanalyzed by amateur researchers convinced they can see a shift in one of the standing shapes between 2 nearly identical frames. And the blackened depression at the center of that chamber, the space where a 7th shape once stood and has since, by every available reading, simply lain down and gone still, remains, as far as anyone knows, exactly as they found it. Whether that stillness means an ending or a pause is the one question nobody on that team has been willing to answer, on or off the record, in the months since they climbed back out into the gray Irish morning and watched 18 tons of solid rock swing, shut behind them without a sound.